Well, Congressman, we appreciate you coming on the show right now. Tell us about some of the major projects you're working on through natural resources and border security. I know you're highly focused in certain areas in the congressional world, so give us kind of a brief as to what's the latest and greatest.
Yeah, we're continuing all the great work of the first year of the Trump administration and this Congress, and we've got the themes that you'll see that continue are with tax reform and the things we've done to boost the economy and business, and regulatory reform is going to continue to be a big thing this year, as well as a number of big projects. The infrastructure bill is being discussed, and we'll see how that shakes out for Louisiana. But that's the larger picture. On the more focused thing, what you're talking about is some of the things we've been working on. I serve on the Judiciary Committee and the Natural Resources Committee. Both are important to the country and certainly to Louisiana. Over in Natural Resources, just this week, we're going to be discussing one of my bills that will help secure our borders and support those who protect them. That we have the Securing Our Borders and Wilderness Act. And this is just an example of common sense legislation to fix problems that exist in the swamp here. So for a long time, border security officials have been barred from entering designated wilderness areas, which leaves about 96 miles of our southern border free of law enforcement. And so obviously that means illegal aliens and drug traffickers cross into the U.S. at those spots. And it's just common sense that we need to have law enforcement there. So this is a bill that will fix the problem, that will stop the endangerment of the American people for no reason. It puts our brave men and women who are dedicated to protecting this nation at serious risk. So we're going to address the problem. We're going to have Border Patrol agents actually access these areas now, where previously the federal law prohibited it for some crazy reason that escapes us. So that bill is going to move through committee today. And then just 2 weeks ago, our House Judiciary Committee passed a bill that I authored, the Disclosing Foreign Influences Act, which basically is going to restore transparency in our foreign disclosure laws. When foreign nations and principals and rogue agents want to try to influence policy in the U.S. Congress or in Washington, for about 50 years, they've been able to stay below the radar. So we're going to require that to be disclosed to the American people so we have transparency. Ultimately, that's what leads to good government.
Well, with the Russian meddling and some of the congressional investigations around that, all the probes and things, having, foreign agents and foreign bodies trying to meddle in the United States is definitely a major, major problem, but something we've got to address. Let's jump over on infrastructure for just a minute. That has been a highlight over the last week, and obviously President Trump announcing on Monday a $200 billion plan, but a levered plan of $1 trillion to $1.5 trillion. What is the plan on infrastructure? What do you think we'll get at the end of the day? Obviously, the president's has got a proposal. Where does Congress go?
Well, that's a big question. Everyone's sort of on the edge of their seats here. There's no formal agreement or any consensus that's being built just yet, because this is all new, hot off the presses. The interesting thing is that the Trump administration has said the federal investment portion of that 1.5 trillion or whatever the ultimate number winds up being is only going to be about 200 billion. The problem is, the concern is for a state like Louisiana is that we don't have a lot of matching funds. Obviously, we're in a budget deficit. Typically, we are again this year. And that's because state government has been run in ways that we regret, and we need to change all that. But until we can, and because we haven't to this point, we don't have a lot of dollars to go to the table and as bargaining chips to try to get big portions of that infrastructure package. That's a great concern to us because, at least as of right now, the proposal that the president's come out with says that local and state matching funds really have to be the majority of the funds on any of these projects. So, it is going to be a mixture of private investment, private dollars, and it should be, because that's a smart way to do things. But we just don't know all the details yet. We're going to lobby for every single dollar that we can in Louisiana because, look, we desperately need it. You and I and everyone listening to our voices knows that. We can argue we might have some of the greatest needs. Our roadways, our ports and infrastructure, all of it critically important to the country in terms of, what we bring into the port of New Orleans and our ports around the country, what we do for commerce in the country. So, we're all in a difficult spot, but we're going to do the very best we can to get as many of those dollars as we can for our state.
In looking at roads and infrastructure and ports, if you look at the most traveled roads, by 18-wheelers and other things, taking things from Port Fourchon and the ports in North and South and Southeast, Southwest Louisiana. We have some of the highest trafficked roads because of that. And I looked at some schematics back in 2004, and it was pretty dramatic then, but it's only grown. So having a robust infrastructure is certainly something that we've got to have. It's a national security issue, as far as I'm concerned, for all of the U.S.
That's exactly right. And, just the Port of New Orleans alone is so critically important. It is a main artery for trade, exports and imports. We rank in the top 3, top 5, respectively. And that is a thing that we are always hammering home here in D.C. We want everybody to recognize, yes, Louisiana is great for our unique culture and tourism and all that, but we are central not only to the oil and gas industry, obviously, but for the ports and for every industry in the country because of what we do. And our highway system and roadways are, intimately connected to that for all the obvious reasons. We've got to maintain them. The problem is, in our state, as in many other places around the country, is we've had deferred maintenance for so long. And the longer you put off repairs to bridges and roadways and ports and the rest, ultimately the more it costs. So this is a matter of being smart about our investments, and we're going to continue to sing that chorus as often and as fervently as we can.
Well, certainly a big deal. All right, one of the other things that's obviously been running on Talk News for the last couple of weeks, and that is the national debt, the conversation about the budget, adding $300 billion in additional spending to military and other entities of the federal government. And now, the words being said that Republicans no longer care about budget and deficit. They're only focused on these other priorities. What is the long-run plan on our national debt, $20.5 trillion plus dollars? And when, even if we have some good economic things happen, when are we going to see a plan to start to pay this thing down?
Listen, you're asking exactly the right questions, and I think some of that criticism is well deserved. I mean, when I ran for Congress, I ran as a fiscal conservative, and I came here and told our folks back home, our 760,000 constituents, the 4th congressional district, that I would not come here and engage in that nonsense. I would not drive up the federal debt like that, and I voted no on Friday on the budget, and I went against my party with 66 other Republicans because I just could not do it in conscience. I mean, the thing we passed was a monstrosity on Friday. It's going to add over $1 trillion to the debt in this year alone. And I made the point, and I did it respectfully, but look, to me, it's a matter of just basic morality. We are spending money that we know we do not have, and we are sending the bill for our children and grandchildren. Now, the problem is the bill has gotten so large, it will literally be nearly impossible for them to climb out of it. And even with dramatic economic growth, the hole that we're digging is so deep now that it's almost a hopeless matter. And I cannot be a party to that. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, everyone says, oh, well, y'all added to the debt for that. Well, we did in the short run, but that is an investment strategy because we've already seen the effects of that. The economy is growing at a rapid pace, a much more rapid pace. And we're going to have economic growth, which will pay for that. But what we did on Friday was the opposite. Yes, it's critically important to fund the military for every single one of their needs. But everybody needs to remember, 3 days before the vote on Friday, we sent a bill over to the Senate that did exactly that. It funded every military need without all the other unnecessary excess federal spending. And the Senate sent us back something that I just couldn't stomach and many others. So it's a real problem. I don't know what the answer is yet. But I do know we better get very serious about it because we're doing a disservice to the next generation.
The last time we had, major prosperity where the debt was actually being paid back, that was in the late 90s under President Bill Clinton. Of course, him changing tax policy early on in his presidency or midway through his presidency and creating some economic growth, helping with that. Is that the expectation in the Trump administration is once we get GDP above 3 to 5% without rampant inflation that we can pay down some of this?
Well, that's the prevailing thought. That's what everyone argues. That's why they can hold their nose and vote for some of this. But, at some point, even that theory, has its weaknesses. I mean, that is the proper perspective, and I believe that as part of my economic philosophy. But also know that if the other side of the ledger gets too deep in the red, that the whole theory breaks down. I mean, the model breaks down, and that we're dangerously close to that tipping point. I just really feel that, and that's the great concern. Yes, I mean, if we get to 5 or 5.5%, some economists just said we can go higher than that under the the current tax plan and the way everything's shaking out. We certainly hope so. But even at that GDP growth, that amount, it may not be enough to get us out of the hole that we continue to create here. I just think Congress has got to get very serious about spending money that we know we don't have. And everybody knows there's rampant fraud, waste, and abuse across the federal government. We have to get serious about changing some of those practices, or we're doing, as I said, a disservice to the country.
Let's go back to Ronald Reagan days when obviously implementing some pretty aggressive tax reform, tax laws. I mean, you were in a different world then. I mean, you had inflation in crazy levels. You had interest rates at crazy levels. I mean, things just weren't – there was no normal then. He implemented some strategic changes, created some massive prosperity, but also ran up the debt bill, the beginning of the debt bill way back when, and at some point had to ratchet back and reduce some of the tax cuts they had made early on. Is there any expectation with the most recent tax cuts that there could be a potential for having to pull back if things get overheated in the years ahead?
Boy, I hope not, because I genuinely believe that when the government taxes us less, it unleashes the free market, and we're beginning to see that, that entrepreneurs and risk takers and job creators can do what it is that they do instinctively, and that is expand and grow and add new jobs and all the rest. Wages are going up. Millions of Americans have already seen increases in their pay, and they've seen bonuses that companies and even large corporations have pushed down to the employees, as we expected would happen. But to roll back the tax cuts, I think, and really fear that would turn it in the opposite direction, and that you would begin to lose a lot of that steam in the engine. So what we have to do is a delicate balance as we go forward. In the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, there were some sunset provisions on the individual tax rates. They were set to expire. The reductions are set to expire in a few years. There's talk in the Congress of going in and trying to make more of that permanent. And so, I'm one of those voices. I think we need to do that because I think it's right. And we'll see what happens. Hopefully inflation can be kept in check. There's concern about it right now, as you know. But we learned a lot during the Reagan years. There were a lot of lessons learned, and hopefully we can avoid some of those same pitfalls.
Congressman, we appreciate your perspective today and coming on the show. Anything else for the listeners of North Louisiana, and really anybody listening around the U.S. tuning in on the web?
Well, listen, just we're going to continue on this trajectory. This is an election year. It's going to be a contentious year in politics, as we can all expect. But at the end of the day, we have to remember we're all Americans. We had a great event last night at Mount Vernon, the home of George Washington, our first president, where we talked about honor and civility. We had a good bipartisan group, about 70 members of Congress, leaders of both sides, and we dialogued about that, how we need to change the tone of our politics. I think we can. I think we all need to be pushing in the same direction of what's best for the people, and there's some hope. There's a glimmer of hope anyway, that at least some in Washington are committed to that ideal. So we'll see how it goes, and this is going to be a big year for the country.